So why don't we begin? Welcome everyone. I decided to wear a tie, mostly just so I could remember how to tie the knot, but also for all you guys. My name is Jack Glassman. I chair the committee. I'm also a historical architect and project specialist with the National Park Service, our regional office, working on projects from Maine to Virginia. And in olden days, I worked for the absolutely beloved agency formerly known as the Boston Redevelopment Authority. And so that, among other reasons, I'm thrilled that our meeting we're co-hosting with the BSA Urban Design Committee, including everyone sharing and contributing to a discussion, I hope, with Glenna Langs about her book about Jane Jacobs. We'll talk more about that later. Regarding the urban design, though, Rami and Martin, I don't know if you want to share any news from the Urban Design Committee, then please do.
Good morning, all. My name is Rami Al-Samahi. I'm a co-chair of the Urban Design Committee along with Martin Zogren. And we're delighted to be a part of this event this morning. Our meetings are usually in the evening, so my voice may sound like the morning for that reason, but we're delighted to be here nonetheless. We've had a series of interesting meetings over the last year and a half. We sort of started our chairing of the committee sort of right along coincident with the pandemic. So it's almost all been virtual, but I've managed to have some interesting events and interesting speakers as a result. And I think this is a great part of, is part and parcel with that series. We're about to, for anyone who may be interested, about to launch a workshop, an urban design workshop, which has been something the Urban Design Committee has done in the before times, but it's sort of been on pause during the pandemic. And we're quite interested in what has sort of evolved. It's a look at sort of the triple decker. I know, the BSA has been involved in over the last 2 years, so sort of an effort of kind of re-examining the triple decker from an architectural point of view, what it means in the 21st century. And what we've sort of been asked to do is to understand what that means from a kind of neighborhood scale. So looking at what increased density across the city and across 3 cities really, Boston, Cambridge, neighborhoods in Boston, Cambridge, and Everett. So look for an announcement soon that will sort of announce that topic.
Sure, I'll just follow up along with Rami. My name is Martin Zogren. I'm an urban designer at Sasaki and have taught urban design for a number of years at the GSD. And I have to say that I'm looking forward to this morning's discussion, as I think as an undergraduate, one of the very first books I read on urban design really, of course, like many of us, was Death and Life of the American City, alongside Design with Nature and Image of the City. So between Jane Jacobs and Kevin Lynch and Ian McCard, really the foundations of thinking about urban design in the 20th and now the 21st century. And I think those ideas still resonate with us today. So thank you for having us. And we look forward to the discussion.
Thank you again. All right, just some items of note, things that I thought were of interest, some more direct and maybe some more obscure, but related to historic resources, using the broad term. not to say, when I was looking over last night, some of the articles I wanted to share, it was like I was looking at them sort of through like a Jane Jacobs light, and it's like how they talking about Lowell's comeback and so on, and just this sort of context was really interesting about local, input, local businesses, and the sort of human scale, and taking charge, sort of making decisions from the bottom up, and so on. So anyway, maybe you'll hear it in the same way. Not all of them, but anyway. First up was, and by the way, thanks again to Eileen Cosgrove for scanning the New York Times, which I don't have a subscription to, but she's found some great stories, and I find a lot from the Globe and the Architect's newspaper and so on. But this from not only from the New York Times, but a story about how it's now been officially kind of stabilized, Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, and it's on track for 2024 to actually reopen to the public. I'm sure at least at the lower levels. So the article discusses the renovation efforts at a pretty detailed level, where it's been deemed secure, and the 2024 planned reopening is supposed to coincide with the Olympics, actually in Paris in 2024. I guess the investigators still have yet to confirm if the fire was started by faulty wiring of this fire, or if it was by worker negligence or smoking or something. But we know about all the spread of the lead fumes and the dust and so on. So anyway, just a couple of images of all that amazing scaffolding and the stabilization. Oops. Mouse is moving quickly here. Everybody knows how wonderful the Berkshires are, the rolling hills and the hikes and great food and the cozy inns. But there was a story in the Globe, the Berkshires are haunted. We have the ghost stories to prove it. And yeah, I thought it was just a nice, so kind of scary travelogue of a number of sites. It's really a story about a recent book, 2020 book by Robert Oakes, author of Ghosts of the Berkshires. And he, of all the sites that he visited, he said the only one that really got under his skin was the Hoosac Tunnel portal, which many of us know is a 6 mile, pitch black, 6 miles long, under a mountain, and I think 200 of the 800 workers on it, 200 workers died, and so there are all sorts of interesting stories about whether there would seem to be spirits of the workers who died during this incredible effort. Among the other sites that he mentioned was on the upper right, the Tyringham was built by a politician and Egyptologist, Rob de Peister Titus, and he built a stucco mansion, and these columns are the only things that remain of the 35-room mansion known as Marble Palace. And there was he had brought back a mummy and placed it in the home, an Egyptian mummy. And anyway, he didn't enjoy much time in the house. He died of tuberculosis, and then there were a series of tragedies there. Red Lion Inn, sort of a funny one about visitors would report having their toes tugged and their heads rubbed, and even having a ghost enter the room and climb into bed with guests. So anyway, just sort of a fun local story. And of course, these are great for tourism, great for promotion, and I guess that can be great for historic preservation as well. Another item that Eileen found in the Times, many of us are familiar with dendrochronology, studying tree rings and correlating them with historical dates. or actually informing historical dates from wood timbers compared against the trees. It's used a lot in conservation, but it's nice seeing it in a big story in the New York Times, I think, to educate the public as to this tool, really, to determine the ages of materials and how it's done. So nice education, I guess, into our field, but it also lists some of the challenges with that, as it described the presumptions about framing and styles can be skewed because sometimes there's a so-called cultural lag in the adoption of construction methods. I can see that actually here at our house in Charlestown too. It was an 1840s house. It was kind of braced frame, so it still had a little bit of diagonal, heavy timbers, but it also had what are more like stud walls. So I think this sort of lag occurs because you have old timers that are used to working, you might say old Yankee techniques, working a certain way, and that then doesn't necessarily mean that every house is state of the art. So you can dates can be skewed. My down button doesn't work, so I'm using the mouse. Lowell, city of Lowell, the story about its staging. I wrote another, but the story in the business section of the Globe. Lowell stages a comeback. This is a picture of Lowell City Hall, which, by the way, it was my dad's architectural firm was the descendant of the firm that just designed this. So that was another reason. Exciting to see a nice photo of the Richardsonian Romanesque building. There have been, of course, comebacks in Lowell with the National Park and so on. But the article discusses how a lot of those, there was the downtown, but the sort of neighborhood flavor, especially the Cambodian, the Asian communities, they had their sort of businesses within the neighborhoods, but weren't really able to kind of participate or benefit from as much as the tourism and the downtown. So this time around, rather than in those neighborhood enclaves, there have been some new small businesses, locally owned, ramen bar, bubble tea franchise, businesses celebrating foodies, taking advantage of this kind of critical mass, especially the young people with the Lowell High School downtown. So that's a nice kind of story that there's local businesses are benefiting and then bring the neighborhood kind of around into the center city, if you will. At the same time, then the long planned Hamilton Canal District is finally is arriving, and that's with robotic startups and maker spaces and sort of another revival of the city's industrial heritage. So that's all. Everyone, I don't know about everyone, but there's definitely some optimism that this kind of new renaissance will rival the 1970s from when the park was created. So I will not spend too much time on it, but it's a great detailed article about all the things that are going on from Thursday, actually September 30th, the Globe story. Closer to Boston, the Strand Theater. That's another project that's been talked about for years and years to be not only the theater itself, but the whole Upham's Corner area. So it is showing, it's hosting this Van Gogh show, which was great, but there are even larger plans so that the landmark Strand would have a starring role, and they're looking for a new operator to join the team and also transform nearby site of a parking lot and a former bank building into a new branch library and low-cost commercial space topped by affordable housing. So it's a whole pairing housing with a public library. I guess it's been done in some other cities, but this will be a first for Boston. So they're looking for partners with sort of a vision for this vibrant mixed-use project. I don't know if I've ever been to the Strand, I have to admit, but definitely now there's a good reason for it. Just thought I'd note this news last month that Governor Baker signed, created by executive order, a commission on clean heat. And it's this new panel that hopes for robust climate rules, emission caps, that would be combined with financial incentives to drive mass conversion to renewable electric heat. How does this relate to historic resources? It's a great effort, and we certainly need to move quickly, reducing emissions from heating fuels. There's no question there. I guess I'm including it because we also sometimes I think in the preservation community worry about sort of externalities that might not be anticipated, where there might be disincentives to. We don't want any disincentives to preserve historic windows, for example, and or to destroy building envelopes in order to destroy the village to save it in terms of moving forward with energy conservation. So it's a balancing act. So wanted to share that. Summerville, the Summerville Theater had it's an exciting story, and it's got a sort of a soft opening now, I guess, for maybe it's officially opened, but on the second floor is a ballroom, which who knew? When the Summerville Theater opened more than a century ago, when it offered vaudeville and stage plays and opera, and the auditorium had several productions by the future film director at the time, Busby Berkeley. And then beginning in the 30s with the Great Depression, and a lot less live entertainment, and it served as a neighborhood movie house. And many of us, I'm sure, like to see movies, and I am also heard some musical performances in the auditorium, but didn't realize that this ballroom had been sort of taken over by, I guess, among the 5 screens that were the theater. So it's being reopened and, for live performance. Where it was all cut up, it's now, as you can see in the picture. So to be a live venue. And the work began actually back in January. So that will be exciting to see, literally. Okay. We're so thrilled to have Glenna Lang here to talk about her latest book about Jane Jacobs. Glenna is an educator, author, and poet. Her previous work about Jane Jacobs was Genius of Common Sense, the story of Jane Jacobs and the death and life of great American cities. And that was aimed to inspire young adults, but it did appeal to all ages in the general public and at universities, and was chosen as a 2009 notable book by both the New York Times and the Smithsonian Magazine. As an illustrator, she produced 4 classic poems as picture books for children. She wrote an illustrated Looking Out for Sarah about the day in the life of a seeing eye dog, which won the American Library Association's Schneider Family Award. Although she grew up in Queens, I think, in New York City, she lived for many years in Cambridge, and she teaches at the School of the Museum of Fine Arts, which is now part of Tufts. And I'm going to stop my share and welcome Jane.
Thank you so much, Jack, for that kind introduction And thank you to Susan for
Did I just say welcome, Jane? Sorry.
People do that
Lana.
all the time. I'm used to it.
Yeah.
It's an honor. And thank you also to Rami and Martin for joining the Historic Preservation Committee as a duo. And I am delighted and honored to be here at this wonderful Boston Society of Architecture and to be among a group of distinguished architects, engineers, planners, preservation advocates, et cetera, et cetera. So that's terrific. I'm going to attempt to share my screen now. I hope that technology cooperates. Bear with me, please. Okay, I'm going to go to slideshow here. So it's a pleasure to speak with a group that already has knowledge of Jane Jacobs, the great urbanist writer and thinker. My new book, Jane Jacobs, First City, Learning from Scranton, Pennsylvania, is a twin biography of a person and a place. Jane Jacobs and Scranton, where she was born and lived for her first 18 years before hightailing it to New York City and eventually Toronto. As an adult, Jane recognized and referred to Scranton as my own city. It fascinated her throughout her childhood and nurtured her ideas about how cities work and what makes for livable cities. She argued this in her world-changing, now classic book, The Death and Life of Great American Cities, and all the books that followed that. It is the significance of the connection between Jane and her city that I set out to demonstrate in my new book. Jane's ideas, many of which are accepted and part of the common parlance today, originated not in Greenwich Village, but in the medium-sized, gritty city of Scranton. Such ideas as mixed uses, eyes on the street, the sidewalk ballet, citizen participation, and the need for short blocks, density, incremental growth, and all kinds of diversity are but some of her many concepts that germinated in her hometown. I became interested in this topic through Jane's classic book and her activism on the issues she wrote. They inspired me to create a book on Jane for young adults. As a nonconformist and free thinker, she cared deeply about the communities in which she lived. In New York and Toronto, she helped organize and became a leader in stopping expressways from ravaging neighborhoods. She was never afraid to speak truth to power. I thought these attributes and actions would make her a terrific role model for young people. I teamed up with a fellow children's book author illustrator, Marjorie Wunsch, who had considered creating a picture book about Jane. My wise publisher then, David Godine here in Boston, suggested the book be geared to young adults. In the end, Genius of Common Sense proved to offer a good introduction to Jacobs for older adults as well. At the time, few people knew this fact, that Jane had been born and raised in Scranton. In January 2008, I took my first trip to see where one of the most influential urbanists had spent her formative years. Here's a 2008 photo of Scranton. Even in that short stay in Scranton to see Jane's home and high school and the remnants of the old central city brought alive for me a bygone era in Jane's early life. 3 years later, when Scranton architect John Cowder asked me to speak at the dedication of Jane's childhood home, I jumped at the chance to return to Scranton. This was an opportunity to dig more deeply into Jane's roots and how the city might have affected her, something no one had ever before undertaken. I wanted to understand Scranton and what it was like to live there when the city was a booming anthracite coal capital of the world and a major manufacturing center, before hard times hit and the Great Depression took its toll. I initially thought this project might become an interesting article, but it yielded so many discoveries, so many untapped sources and places to look at and people to interview that it turned into a book. Both Jane and the city of Scranton became the main characters. And here's about 10-year-old Jane sitting in the front of her house, looking across the street. I'd like to share with you the overall scope of the book and highlight some of its content and revelations. Since Jane's books and ideas have attracted readers from a wide range of interests, I hope to engage a broad and general audience. Because Jane was such a keen observer from her early childhood on, my book is also sprinkled with well over 100 historic and contemporary images to show what she observed and to help the reader understand the city. Jane was an early and avid reader, and she was always passionate about history, including the history of Scranton and its phenomenally rapid development. Undoubtedly, she was familiar with this illustration, the frontispiece of Hollister's History of the Lackawanna Valley, written in the late 19th century. That book contained this rendering of the tiny settlement of the future city of Scranton on what was deemed its birth date, September 11, 1840. On that day, several men had arrived from the East and brought new ideas and cutting-edge technology to the area. They planned to construct an iron forge and manufacture pig iron and nails using local iron, limestone, and coal. The last one was the only plentiful one. On what was then known as Slocum Hollow in northeastern Pennsylvania, where the lazy Lackawanna River meets the roaring brook, only 5 houses, a grist mill, and a few other small structures stood. By 1856, the community's downtown was established with a planned street grid shown here and some fine houses, a hotel, churches, commercial buildings, and railroads, and it had grown large enough to incorporate as the borough of Scranton. This grid included alleys, later called courts, that bisected large blocks and established the pattern of development extended in all directions from here forward. With a steady influx of newcomers from nearby regions and immigrants from other countries, plus a burgeoning built environment, in a mere 10 years, the borough officially became the city of Scranton. This is a historic postcard of downtown Scranton around 1906. That was a mere 40 years after it legally became a full-fledged city. It had risen meteorically, as one of the early historians called its precipitous transformation. This was the lively, splendid, promising city Jane's parents chose to settle in and start a business and a family. In 1914, the newspaperman and cartoonist Bill Steinke sketched this charming illustration showing the diversity and profusion of industry in Scranton at the time. Such a variety and range of industry, Jane concluded in her Economy of Cities, was one of the most utmost important to the economic well-being of a city. When Scranton became too dependent on coal and the demand for it declined, its economy sputtered and tanked. Here are Jane's parents. Neither of Jane's parents had close family ties or any other connection to Scranton before they moved to what was then Pennsylvania's third most populous city, surpassed only by Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. Her father, John Decker Butzner, grew up on his parents' modest farm in rural Virginia outside Fredericksburg. A rich uncle recognized Decker's scholarly abilities and saw to it that he received a top-notch college education. Decker studied medicine at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville and became a medical doctor in 1905. He continued his training at a Philadelphia hospital where he met his future wife, the supervising night nurse named Bess Robison. From the village of Espy, Pennsylvania, outside Bloomsburg, 60 miles southwest of Scranton, Bess grew up in a stately brick house with 8 siblings. Her father was a highly respected lawyer and her mother was a school teacher before marriage. And here's Bess with young Jane and her older sister, Betty. Despite their country roots, Dr. and Mrs. Butzner wanted to live in a sizable city. They deliberated carefully as to what city would hold the most promise for launching a successful medical practice and raising children. Rejecting the runner-up, Detroit, the Butzners decided on the booming and bustling city of Scranton with its 130,000 residents and thriving economy. This decision would intrigue and perplex Jane her entire life. In 1909, the couple married and set about making Scranton their home. On May 4th, 1916, Jane Isabel Butzner was born. Having recently lost their 2.5-year-old son to a childhood disease, Decker, as he was called, and Bess and their 6-year-old daughter, Betty, were especially thrilled at the arrival of a new baby. Jane's father delivered the infant girl at home, and the parents chose the old family name of Jane. Within the next few years, the family would welcome 2 more little boys, John and Jimmy. The Butzners had bought this newly built house where Jane was born on Electric Street from a man down the block who worked as a mason and carpenter. Although it's a lot stripped of its former glory, he had built the single dwelling as a business venture, a common way for individuals with construction skills to earn a living. Electric Street was in the newly emerging Greenridge neighborhood, a streetcar suburb of the city, its growth stimulated by transportation extending into previously sparsely populated land, but still within the city limits. The incremental growth of multiple small projects like this one made for variation among size, design, and ornamentation of houses along the street. It also led to a mixture of people in different lines of work and a range of incomes in the community. The Butzners' next door neighbor on one side worked as a plaster contractor. On the other side lived a manager of a company that supplied pipes to coal breakers. Across the street were some bigger and fancier houses with more affluent families. Even in her very first years, Jane not only observed the sidewalk in front of her family's home, but she also experienced it. As in much of the rest of Scranton, the sidewalk consisted of a line of adjacent slate squares. Slate was plentiful along the area's abundant coal deposits. This photo captures Jane and her brother John while their Aunt Emily was visiting and shows some toy vehicles they could ride. Jane reminisced about the vehicles that her mother called velocipedes. And this is Jane speaking. They were really tricycles, Jane told the interviewer. And we also had a little stuffed bear that stood about 1.5 feet high. I got very irritated at this bear. It had 4 tiny wheels. Every time you hit a joint in the slate sidewalk, you had to pick it up and move it to the next slate. I would get exasperated at that. So I learned to get out in sufficient time to stake my claim on one of the velocipedes, not the bear. Jane's personality was already surfacing. At the end of their long block, the Butzners encountered the cluster of stores known as Green Ridge Corners. Nearby were industrial buildings, such as this plaster factory, and in the walkable distance, coal breakers loomed like giant praying mantises. George Sanderson, who blazed the trail into Green Ridge and subdivided the land into plots on the grid, did not mind erecting his own house amidst industry. He built a substantial and attractive home not far from churches and schools, but also factories and businesses. At the same time, he donated land for the common good, such as libraries and educational structures. What Jane observed and would later call mixed uses occurred organically in Scranton. When Jane was not quite 5 years old, the Butzners had outgrown their compact house. Decker and Bess Butzner and their 4 young children moved to a larger house less than a mile away in the neighboring borough of Dunmore. They bought the house on Monroe Avenue from George and Martha Yinke in February 1921. Mr. Yinke had emigrated from Germany. He worked as a self-employed contractor and most likely designed and built this fine house himself. With its greater size and brick exterior, it stood out from the others on the block. Neighbors here had also emigrated from various countries, including Sweden, Austria, Belgium, and Ireland. As you neared the Electric Street end where the streetcar ran, houses were smaller and more affordable to lower income folks. People of Catholic, Protestant, and Jewish faiths resided in close proximity on this block and throughout the Scranton area. Jane appreciated these many kinds of diversity. Like all of the city's neighborhoods, this section of Dunmore, where the Butzners lived, had a multitude of small businesses in easy walking distance scattered within it. On the next block over, Thomas McClintock had a greenhouse and a flower shop on the corner. Across the street from McClintock's florist was Oakey's grocery store, which was in the building in the upper left here. By building a small addition with a large window, people could convert part of their home into a store. These mom and pop businesses were found mainly at corners and along the busier streets, but others, like the potato chip and peanut butter factory with its little sales window, seen here below, which Jane described in her book, Economy of Cities, were in backyards and alleys. And I took the peanut butter factory photo in 2011, and it was gone a few years later. In Scranton and Dunmore, when Jane was in grammar school, she attended Dunmore's George Washington School, number 3. Everyone walked to school because they all lived nearby, students, teachers, and the principal alike. All Scranton and Dunmore schools were truly neighborhood schools, with students residing within a 15 to 20-minute walk. When the school board hired teachers, they usually assigned them to the school nearest where they lived. One of Jane's teachers literally lived next door to the Washington School. Its principal lived 2 doors down from the Butzner's. Children and adult educators sometimes ran into one another along the way and walked together. Furthermore, everyone walked to the school twice a day because they all went home for lunch during the hour-and-a-half break. The last principal of this school, before it was closed and eventually demolished in the mid-1970s, judged it, and this is a quote, "the most beautiful building in Dunmore, inside and out." When Jane was growing up, the city and boroughs had a deep civic commitment to the schools. In grammar school, Jane caught the eye of her fellow students and her teachers. She was bright, independent, and outspoken, but not necessarily well-behaved. She recalled to family and friends that her first and second grade teachers were her favorites, but her enjoyment of grammar school plummeted from then on. In third grade, she convinced her classmates not to raise their hands to promise they would brush their teeth every day for the rest of their lives. Her father had explained to her the seriousness of a promise. Surely no one would keep such a promise, she told her teacher and the class. Jane never suffered fools. When her fourth grade teacher declared that all cities develop around waterfalls, Jane stated that this did not make sense. She had seen a little waterfall in a park on the city's edge, but it had nothing to do with how Scranton came to be. Her sixth grade teacher signed Jane's autograph book here, referring to her euphemistically as the most original one in the class. Throughout her time at the George Washington School number 3 in Dunmore, Jane and her friend Marie Van Bergen, who's pictured here in her favorite outfit, were fast friends who shared a passion for reading, joined the school's current events club, and belonged to the same Girl Scout troop. I was fortunate to find Marie, then 95 years old, a lifelong observant Scrantonian with a crystal clear memory. She painted verbal pictures of their grade school years together, their teachers and friends and their families. While Jane lived in a fancier single family dwelling, Marie's family occupied a 2-family wood frame house. Her paternal grandparents lived downstairs. Her grandfather, of New York Dutch stock, was a Protestant and a Republican. He owned and ran a specialty grocery where Marie's father worked as a clerk and made deliveries. Her mother came from an Irish Catholic family and was a Democrat. Marie's mother, with her skill as a seamstress, had stitched the dress that Marie's wearing in this photo herself, copying an outfit another girl had bought in an elegant New York City store where the Van Bergens could not have afforded to shop. Jane told Marie that her mother, Bess Butzner, thought it was bad to copy the suit. Neither second grader knew quite what to make of the comment, but both remembered the story many years later. On their lunchtime explorations, the schoolmates saw architectural treasures. Yeah, right. Excuse me. This is the school administration building. Even as a very young child, Jane told an interviewer, I was so interested in the downtown that I liked it when I had a dental appointment. And believe me, it was not painless dentistry in those days, but I liked it because I got to go downtown. For 8th grade, Jane's parents paid a small tuition to enroll her in Scranton's George Washington School #1, thus positioning her to go to Scranton's Central High School the following year. Located in the central city in this beautiful Gothic Revival building designed by local architect Lewis Hancock in 1910, it housed the city's school administration as well. Jane, to her delight, could take the streetcar to school each day and explore the downtown during lunchtime with 3 other tuition students who resided too far from school to walk home from lunch. On their lunchtime explorations, the schoolmates saw architectural treasures still standing when Jane was an 8th grader in the late 1920s.
Right. You know when you empty this,
Somebody
that there's water in the bottom of this?
Yeah.
You empty that?
Thank you. In that era, Scranton had many beautiful edifices, old and new. New ideas need old buildings, as Jane famously wrote. Jane always preferred this mix of ages and styles. Scranton's architects were often hired from New York or were locals educated at top architecture schools like Cornell or Columbia universities. On the same street as their school, just down the block, the 4 girls admired the old post office, pictured here, built in the 1890s. It was demolished for a more spacious post office around 1930. Across the street from the post office, surrounded by open space in a plaza, stood the 1884 eclectic Lackawanna County Courthouse, designed by Isaac G. Perry, who was the state architect of New York. Nearby, the girls went inside the Scranton Dry Goods department store, designed by prolific Scranton architect Edward Langley in 1906. Here, Jane amused her friends by going up the down escalator, the only moving stairway in the city. For Jane, the downtown, with its stunning architecture, concentration of small businesses, and people from all neighborhoods, offered more excitement than any classroom. Girl Scouts served as a welcome respite from the constraints of school and helped nurture Jane's interests and reinforced her sense of a woman's boundless possibilities. She's the one roasting the marshmallow here. From the time she was 10 and continuing beyond high school, Scouts were a constant and special part of her life. Jane's childhood friend, Marie, Jane's letters to her family, plus the newspapers of the times revealed the extent of Jane's involvement and her dedication to the Girl Scouts. She attended weekly meetings after school, spent summers at the Girl Scouts Camp Archibald, and eventually was among a select few who attained the highest rank of eaglet, as did her sister Betty. In many ways, the Girl Scouts encouraged Jane's passion for writing through their poetry contests and the excellent editors of the monthly high-quality American Girl magazine. The Scouts also nurtured her skills of observation, self-direction, and leadership. Their practice of democratic self-governance their incorporation of good literature through their magazine and books to read for badges, their belief in inclusion of girls of all backgrounds, and their emphasis on female empowerment were just some of the things that appealed to Jane. In scouting, Jane found the freedom to indulge her imagination and creativity, as well as an opportunity to observe nature, people, and urban life. In Jane's day, the Girl Scout handbook actually contained a chapter on observation both of nature and cities. Along with the discovery of the major role of scouting in Jane's life and the community as a whole, another fortunate discovery for me was the importance of the African American community in Scranton. It was a small and cohesive population which mainly resided in the neighborhood between the city's two high schools, Central and Tech. Jane's relation to this community became clear. Shown here are neighborhood kids at the Progressive Community Center and at John Strader's birthday party. He's the kid wearing the pointy hat. Through her schools, Girl Scouts, and chance encounters in everyday life, Jane intermingled with African Americans. This held true for her siblings and other Scrantonians as well. There were African American doctors, dentists, and business people who worked with and employed whites. After high school, Jane's friend Betty Totley, an African American, and Jane's brother John took part in a youth forum that discussed challenges facing African American youth looking for jobs in the city. Undoubtedly, Jane attended the forum. John, her brother, would become a prominent civil rights judge appointed by Presidents Kennedy and Johnson. In Death and Life, Jane declared, this is a quote, "Our country's most serious social problem is racial segregation and discrimination." In 1961. We now understand that her concern about this issue began in Scranton. I am indebted to the many members of this community who shared their and their parents' experiences, photographs, and documents with me, and to the newspapers and reporters of the time that covered the accomplishments and social news of all its citizens. Known for decades as one of the finest schools in the country, Scranton's high school was located within a block of Jane's 8th grade school and across the street from one of her favorite destinations, the Albright Public Library. The school board had engaged the highly regarded New York City architectural firm of Little and O'Connor to design a new high school where the old one had been. Michael J. O'Connor, a graduate of Columbia University School of Architecture, and his partner and fellow alum, Willard Parker Little, created the facade's variety of colors and textures with native stone from West Mountain. Sparing no expense, they planned the high school's ornament, accentuating the front entrances and focal windows to complement that of the Albright Library across the street. The elaborate and eclectic new high school building opened in September 1896. The morning paper pronounced the new high school building the best investment ever made by the city of Scranton. At Central, Jane's classes, extracurricular activities, and homeroom were comprised of students of diverse backgrounds who lived in Scranton proper, plus a small portion from its vicinity, like Dunmore. Although her high school grades would never land her on the honor roll, Jane's friends remembered her as really smart. She preferred reading and thinking on her own to studying for tests. She joined the drama club and acted in quite a few plays, but Jane's overriding passion was writing. By her junior year, an article in Impressions, the high school student magazine, listed Jane among the 7 especially active members of the writing club. During her senior year, she became poetry editor of Impressions. The magazine reflected upon the onset of the Depression and the toll it was taking on Scranton and the country. This slide includes Jane's high school graduation photo here. Central provided an indispensable education for children of all backgrounds and immigrants who comprised a large component. Carl Marzani, pictured here, back row, second from the left, arrived in Scranton from Italy at age 12 with his family, not knowing a word of English, and was consequently placed in first grade, as was common. A quick learner, Carl was promoted at record speed through the grades and entered Central High a couple of years before Jane. In his 4-volume memoir, he wrote about his early days in Scranton and paid tribute to several teachers at the high school who had gone out of their way to tutor him and in the end guided him into getting a scholarship to a first-rate college, Williams College. Based on merit, Marzani and a dozen or so top students were chosen citywide to try out the office of mayor and his cabinet for an hour during the annual Boys' Week. Sharing an interest in drama and writing, Jane and he became lifelong friends. He too was a keen observer and independent thinker and excellent writer. The importance of Jane's internship at the daily newspaper, the Scranton Republican, cannot be overestimated. After high school, Jane bartered her writing and observation talents for an unpaid internship at the morning newspaper. At the paper, as you can see in this all-male newsroom, she was one of the few females, but she earned the respect of the more experienced reporters and the editors. Not only did she hone her writing skills here, but she assiduously studied the workings of her city. Despite her flippant remark that she made later on, that she mainly penned articles about the meetings of the Women of the Moose and the Ladies' Nest of Owls clubs, within a few months, she was assigned the responsibility of reviewing plays and books. Before long, she was writing news articles as well, gaining insights into the politics, institutions, and workings of the city. Jane cut her journalistic teeth here and proved her talents to the editors. Jane valued the press's feeling of responsibility to report impartially all that was going on. Newspapers served as the city's primary means of communication. Like most cities in the first half of the 20th century, Scranton had morning and evening daily papers with special editions for important breaking news stories. Weeklies covered smaller neighborhoods or were printed in German, Polish, or in English, but geared to the Welsh or Irish populations. The city's papers continually kept track of recognized and commended citizens of all backgrounds, reporting on everything from municipal elections to piano recitals and who made a school's honor roll. Being a reporter afforded Jane an opportunity to learn more about Scranton's seamier side that especially intrigued her. The notorious red light district, the largest in the northeastern states, and the mafia, which originated in the region. This so-called bawdy house located in the alley behind the evening paper's offices, in 1928 was allegedly bombed by the mafia, which the owner had not paid off. This photo came from the paper. Before Jane departed for New York in 1934, in an unusual move, the editors praised her in a column on the newspaper's op-ed page for ably assisting on the paper since last fall. Jane continued her attachment and sporadic but intense involvement with Scranton long after she moved to New York. In New York, she married architect Robert Hyde Jacobs in 1944 and settled in Toronto in 1968 in protest of the Vietnam War. In 1943, Jane had used her position at the Iron Age magazine to bring attention to the city's predicament of unemployment and abundance of empty buildings. Scranton's economic decline that had begun in the 1920s had accelerated, due largely to its excessive dependence on mining anthracite coal. With the Chamber of Commerce and Scranton's morning newspaper, she helped bring wartime industry to her city and was much applauded, as you can see here. After Jane's widowed mother had sold the family home and departed Scranton in the late 1940s, Jane no longer had a pressing reason to return to her home city, but she kept an eye on it nevertheless. Beginning in the mid-1950s and into the 1970s, Scranton, like declining cities across the US, resorted to urban renewal, which Jane had attacked in her iconoclastic 1961 book. Perhaps this policy's worst effect on her economically struggling city was the senseless destruction of the majority African-American Central Tech neighborhood, which residents today still decry. Their homes were supposedly replaced in 1972 by the low-rise Midtown apartments shown here. I tell some of the stories in my book. In the mid-1980s, Jane came into conflict with the Scranton Chamber of Commerce, with which she had once collaborated. With Central City almost abandoned, the charming Victorian buildings at the epicenter of downtown had fallen into terrible disrepair. Scranton faced the dilemma of how to deal with this civic disgrace. A dedicated group of architects, business owners, and other citizens opposed the suburban-style shopping mall. The mall was backed by an alliance of city, state, and federal officials. The group of preservationists turned to Jane for support. She had recently been in Scranton for her 50th high school reunion. On New Year's Eve, 1987, Jane composed a very moving and strategic, impassioned letter to Scranton's Office of Economic and Community Development, arguing that the city's old buildings and intact streets, Jane said, had now become unusual and valuable assets and a source of economic growth. Malls touted as downtown saviors were likely to economically deaden and victimize the central city, she went on. In April 1992, roughly 20 buildings of assorted size and condition were, in a matter of minutes, reduced to rubble to make way for this shopping mall, which soon fulfilled Jane's prediction. And the bare brick front extends quite far, both right and left here. Today, the city of Scranton is attempting to repurpose its downtown mall, and old buildings are finding new uses. New and diverse immigrants have arrived, injecting the city with new vitality. Many old-timers, delightfully, are choosing to stay, and some former Scrantonians have actually been attracted to return. With this much-needed continuity, new mom and pop businesses have opened, and for the first time since 1930, the census recorded an increase in the city's population. Scranton recently chose its first woman mayor, Mayor Paige Cognetti, who fortuitously is an admirer of Jane Jacobs and understands and values Jane's ideas, such as the need for public engagement and diversified economy. Ultimately, Scranton gave Jane a lens through which to view all urban places. At the end of her life, her thoughts often turned to her home city. She was contemplating the importance of medium-sized cities on the scale of Scranton, livable and manageable, breeding tolerance and a sense of civic purpose through close contact and familiarity among a diverse population. This insight may be a key to uniting ourselves even in this divisive time. These are but some of the many tidbits presented in Jane Jacobs' First City. It is jam-packed. I hope you will check out the book with its far more details than I would ever be able to present in a talk such as this. I thank you all for listening.
Thank you so much, Plano. I'm so pleased that you mentioned I love the Girl Scouts and that handbook of observation. And I didn't realize that the handbook also talked about cities, but how she sure sort of ran with that and took those, sort of a part of her methodology, I guess, and kind of research, and especially love the reference to the sidewalk and the Slate sidewalks, the sidewalk ballet.
Thank you.
And I know you touched a little bit about the physical form. I guess, was it their first house where they're on an extraordinarily long block, but then you also mentioned those courts and the alleys and how she loved those and learned from them, and how that seemed to inspire all those the unexpected encounters with people and the different types of all the different types of people and the different businesses and the scales of the little factories behind and next to the houses. So I just thought that was really fascinating. But that's sort of the physical form of the short blocks versus the long ones. I don't know if you had wanted to expand on that, but.
Oh, I'm so glad you picked that up, and thank you for all those wonderful observations. I really appreciate that. The courts were really important everywhere in downtown, and they provided a cheap place for people to live as well. So behind the Central High School and all the way up to Technical High School, that area where African Americans eventually settled was, first settled by, all sorts of non-African American people in the beginning, and there they lived side by side. A lot of poor Eastern European immigrants, and it also gave people places to start small businesses, garages and warehouses and all sorts of things. So they were essential to the city. So she loved short blocks, and she loved everything being jumbled together.
Mm.
So,
thank you.
Yeah.
So, any questions, comments? Feel free to please unmute and. Anybody?
Well, Jack, I was delighted in our previous conversation to learn that you had experienced a mid-sized city as well, and that some of the things that you read resonated with your own experience, although you're not in.
Well, so many things, yeah, including my Claremont, New Hampshire, which I had discovered through actually when I worked a long time ago for Stefan and Bradley Associates, and we had work there. We were doing mill rehabs and subsidized sort of Section 8 housing and all. And it was at the time I was moving into trying to decide what to do with my master's thesis in historic preservation planning. And I settled on an old forge shop as a hypothetical adaptive use within this town of Claremont, which it's certainly not as big as Scranton, but it had the similarity, the sort of scale where there were my subject building. You could stand next to that my little 2-story blacksmith shop. Just to the right was a Catholic school with beautiful classical revival porticos and cottages. Turn a little bit further, and then there was the First Baptist Church, I think it was. Turn 180 degrees, and there were 4- and 5-story textile mill buildings going down to the river. And then turn a little bit further, and then the street was sloping up to the commercial block. So just all of those things that came together, and you would then see the mountains just beyond, because the hills of Claremont. So all of the nature and the industry and those different uses. So yeah, it certainly resonated with me in that sense.
Yeah, and those cities were so valuable and so plentiful, and they really kind of hit rock bottom after the Depression and in the 50s and all that. And I think they're, again, being appreciated and attracting a lot of people. And it's interesting that you mentioned the hills around Claremont, because Scranton also was kind of in a bowl. I think of it, it was ringed with fairly large hills. I wouldn't call them mountains. It's not far from the Poconos, but it created a lower bowl where everyone was kind of pushed together. And that helps, I think, concentrate on the population.
My first question was about the physical form, but I guess it's sort of a psychological question too that I wondered with the built down houses. I wondered if there was always the sense of optimism and the vitality, but also the sense of dread. If you had your house in your yard, the sense that it could all collapse from the coal mines down below, and that happened regularly, and everything you had was swallowed up.
Yeah. It's one thing I did leave out of this little talk was what they called euphemistically subsidence. And it was a regular occurrence, and the newspapers were full of dreadful photos because the city was literally undermined. Most of downtown had mines under it. So a lot of houses didn't have basements, or people who had basements would hear coal miners talking below, and they would do what they call robbing the pillars. They would take the extra coal from the pillars, and there wasn't enough to support it and build. And in fact, the man Carl Marzani, who was Jane's friend, has a very funny passage in his memoir. Not so funny, I guess. But waking up one morning, his bedroom was on the second floor, and he realized he was looking at straight on at the wheels of cars out his second floor bedroom. So it was scary. And now once the mines closed, they took a lot of the coal dumps, and they used the coal waste to fill the mines. So it's better now, but there are many places where you can't build buildings with basements.
There was like mine tailings that they just used for.
Yeah, it's when the coal is combined with the rock, and it's basically useless. Too much rock.
Can I? You talked about the high school or the schools in general and civil commitment to the high schools, and I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit more to that and how that might have affected or influenced Jane? Sounds like she took a lot of interest in that in terms of her writing afterwards.
You mean the diversity of the school population, or how the schools?
How one of your comments, if I understood correctly, there was a strong civic commitment to the schools and how the schools were run.
Yeah, I mean, the civic commitment was certainly expressed in the newspapers in praise of them, but they were well funded, as you could see from the elaborate architecture, the amount of money they put into the facilities. And the teachers were clearly very happy. They were very devoted to their jobs. The women, oh gosh, certainly while Jane was there, couldn't marry if they wanted to keep their jobs. So there's some sad stories there. So I mean, that shows the degree of commitment. There's an amazing principal who, I think, it's a long story, but basically commits suicide at the end of her life because she wasn't able to marry her beloved, and until she retired. She was in her 60s or something like that. But the teachers spent their own time tutoring people after school. They headed up these clubs. The parents all attended the plays. There was a lot of parental involvement, more in enthusiasm and attending various events. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I'm just very interested in the whole role of schools and how, also in her thinking, but also in just how towns developed and people become more engaged in what's happening. I mean, or caring, if the building is going to be torn down or the city is going to change, how do we educate young people to be engaged in that way?
I mean, Jane had not a good attitude about structured learning because she was such a leader, but that didn't mean that she wasn't appreciative of the schools and how they brought people together. And her friends really arranged from children of coal miners to, hotsy-totsy lawyers, kids. And they were all in Scouts together. It didn't make any difference to her. She and her friend Marie discussed the story of Jane's mother being a little bit prejudiced. Jane said she finally educated her. But Jane didn't think that copying the dress was that bad, and I don't think Marie did either. But that was a kind of class attitude. I don't know what else to call it. But Jane had diversity in her own family because her father came from a poor country family, and her mother came from a kind of well-respected, very middle class, maybe upper middle class town and family, most of all. I hope I'm answering your question.
Yeah.
Thanks. Any other questions?
Was there a question from Ludmilla? Yeah.
Oh,
hi, hi, Jack. I thank you very much for a wonderful presentation. I actually wondered if you could perhaps tell us a little bit more about the quote you used from Jane Jacobs on old ideas can sometimes use new buildings and new ideas must use old buildings. How do you think that attitude about old buildings being used for adaptation and new use, especially by scrappy new companies who don't perhaps have the ability to do new construction, how did that come out of her understanding of Scranton and also her experience in New York City?
Well, she certainly came out of New York City. I mean, when she's growing up, the buildings haven't gotten quite old enough, but I mean, she loved the old buildings, and she didn't want to see them go. I think it was sad to see that beautiful old post office get torn down. They put up actually a very nice Art Deco building in 1930 or so, and but you know, she loved architecture. She realized that some buildings had to go, like because Scranton was all wood to begin with, downtown Scranton. I'm trying to think of what she saw that got repurposed. I mean, certainly the houses got repurposed as little mom and pop stores in her lifetime. She thought there should be cheap properties that entrepreneurs could move into, you know, rather than buy or put up new fancy buildings. I'm trying to think what else. You know, they weren't really renovating buildings a lot at that time because they weren't that old. But I mean, to tear down that Central Tech neighborhood was really awful, because a lot of those houses where people of lesser means lived were in what they dubbed courts, because alleys was a day class A word. But there were really nice houses very, very close together in former backyards. So the land is being repurposed constantly, especially in places like the alleys. You know, they have little businesses side by side with people's homes, and those turn over more quickly as people are, you know, earning more money and moving out to the streets. They're no longer alley people or court people, they call them. So, I mean, she was never against all change, but she liked that traditional change of, you know, in Greenwich Village, artists moving into commercial and industrial buildings. And, you know, artists never have much money, but they have good taste. So they're a wonderful thing for a neighborhood. Does that?
Thank you. No, it's fine. Thank you.
And there's so much in there. I think when you kind of understand the whole fabric of her growing up, you know, it makes a lot of sense.
And I do think she had some very important points to make about scale, and the fact that her experience at Scranton was with a mid-sized city sort of underlined, I think, that attitude that she had. She didn't mind the large scale of New York City. I think she just railed against removing the fabric that connected the diversity of scale as well as the diversity of uses in the city.
I think, you know, New York got so big, and Toronto's unbelievably gigantic, that the city is so big that it's no longer manageable, and she was much more in favor of smaller units. And a mid-sized city has those. It is by nature a smaller unit. And one of the things with the Carl Marzani photo is that's part of Boys Week. I mean, this group of kids gets to try out these positions of city government. They're in touch with city government. The kids who didn't participate they could go visit. You know, there was a direct connection between people and their municipal government, which I don't think you'd find in a big city. Like, you know, that.
Yeah, it was the right size, advocating for the right size. I love the term, I don't know if that was your term or Jane's, about second growth. This is not necessarily about something you want to promote or for preservation, but that, you know, after the coal breakers were demolished and everything was just sort of abandoned, and then eventually there was a second growth of strip malls and industrial parks and so on. But just the terminology that I associate with woodlands or forests or something applied here was intriguing.
Yeah. She was very into nature, and you know, she understood the ecology of cities, and second growth is like second growth forest. Yeah. So that's great.
Any other thoughts? No? All right. Well, I guess not. Well, anybody? No. Thank you very much. Thanks again.
Thank you, and thank you for your.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
The book it's from New Village Press. It's available, and I know I got my copy at Porter Square Books, and with Harvard Bookstore has been carrying it as well, or one can go to the publisher. And I posted a couple of times a direct link in the chat. So thank you again for wonderful portraits.
My pleasure. Thank you all.
It was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And hopefully everyone got the agenda and downloaded it when it was attached from Susan. But there are tons of things going on. Conferences, the Association for Preservation Technology International annual conference coming up at the end of the month. Events from our regional chapter, and of course the UMass Dartmouth, the symposiums on the 22nd and 23rd. You have up that last page just another window, but I assume it's not too late, Ludmila, for people to
not too late
for a 2-day in-person.
No, and actually there is a discount for members of APT, New England and APT. National brutalism and the public universities, past, present, and future. We're very excited to have it in person, actually. Yeah. The keynotes are flying from California. So yeah, thank you.
Sure. And then we got the Preservation Alliance Achievement Awards and National Trust Conference, the Architects Newspaper. I think this is their second annual, what will be annual reuse and renewal virtual summit. So with that, thanks to everyone, and we'll hope to see you next month.
Thank you.
Okay.
Wonderful presentation.
Thank you so much.
Oh,
thank you, everyone.
Everybody.